Hi, and welcome to Check Your Thread, a podcast about sewing more sustainably. My name's Zoe, and I'm obsessed with sewing. I've been blogging about it for over 13 years and am the creator and host of the popular handmade wardrobe challenge, Me Made May. But like many people, I've become increasingly concerned about the climate crisis and the way my lifestyle contributes to it. So in this podcast, I'll be nerding out about making clothes whilst exploring how to minimise the negative impact that it may have. I really hope you'll join me on this journey. It's episode 10 of the Check Your Thread podcast. We're into double figures now. So exciting. It's the first week of October. I hope that you're well and having a lovely day wherever you are. Have you been doing any autumn/spring sewing? So for me, I finally finished my kids' birthday garments, and this is the third week I've mentioned them now, so I promise not to mention them again. This week, I also made another layering top using the Tilly and the Buttons Agnes top pattern and some lovely soft Pontel jersey. I made like a half-sleeve version this time, and the fabric is a gorgeous kind of inky blue marl. With the leftovers, I made a pair of baby trousers to send along to a baby shower that I was invited to, but I can't attend. So there's pretty much only scraps left again. Oh, and I also dropped a post on my Sozo What Do You Know blog that I'll link to for my Free Pattern Friday series that may be of interest to you. So, tiny backstory. I road test free sewing patterns and tutorials, and I post about one every first Friday of the month. So I do that to highlight some of the wonderful resources that kind and generous designers have released for free, because I want to kind of fight back against the idea that we've discussed a couple of times in this podcast already, that sewing is an activity reserved for those who've got lots of disposable income. Anyway, this month I've posted about the excellent Bombazine oven mitt project, which is a truly superb way to use up fabric scraps and leftovers. And it might be of interest to those of you who wish to make a few presents for Christmas or any other holiday that you celebrate, partly by giving gifts, because it's a wonderful, useful, gender-free project. And you don't really need to necessarily match the recipient's personal tastes or body shape or anything for them to enjoy or get use from it. So I'll stick a link in the show notes. So sustainability-wise, this week I bought a bar of solid shampoo, but have so far been too afraid to try it out yet. Like, I know I'm the last person in the world now to have tried solid shampoo, but I've been getting refills of regular liquid shampoo for the last couple of years, so I didn't really think it was worth making the leap. Until earlier this year, I had a fantastic zero-waste shop within walking distance of me. And then after we moved from that town, I found that our local health food shop does refills. So I've been refilling our old bottles of shampoo and conditioner, body wash, hand wash, and washing up liquid, even though it actually works out more expensive. But anyway. But then the other day, whilst I was getting my refills, I asked the guy that was working there if they then returned the large product bottles to their supplier. And he basically said that no, the supplier aren't interested in getting them back. And then he said something wishy-washy about how sometimes he takes them home and uses them to water his garden. And I kind of questioned, well, what is really the point of paying more for products that actually aren't really saving plastic waste in the way that I thought? Although I do think it's still probably saving a bit per bottle by comparison. But anyway, I'm investigating other options, hence the shampoo bar. I'll let you know how I get on. Right, wow. It has been the most incredible week for Check Your Thread over on Patreon. So we have 10 amazing new people having signed up to support the show. Thank you so much, Caro, Jean, Naomi, Melinda, Maeve, Joanna, Norma, Amy, Marianne, and Lorraine. Thank you so much. Oh, I can't even believe it. You know what? When I receive a notification that someone has signed up as a Patreon, I get just such a fantastic feeling, because it means that someone has connected in some way with the podcast. And the feed isn't even jam-packed with episodes yet. Literally, today's just the 10th episode. So even though there isn't heaps and heaps and heaps of episodes on the feed yet, they already know that they want to help make more episodes happen. So that is just so thrilling that people are actually connecting with what we've managed to do so far in these early days, you know? So I don't know, maybe they found a topic that we discussed particularly interesting, or maybe they've been inspired to try something new or do something in a different way. or they found it entertaining on their commute or whilst they sew, like whatever it is for each of those people. It's just amazing. So thank you so, so much to all 34 patrons of Check Your Thread. Okay, so today's episode. It's a really interesting one, in fact. I recorded a conversation with someone who has many fascinating ideas and projects relating to sewing, textiles and sustainability. His name is Guy Simonzato, and you can find him on Instagram at The Light Touch London. He explained the meaning and philosophy behind the light touch, and we chatted about the Fibreshed movement, the soul-to-soul life cycle of clothing, his love of wool, millennial sewers, decommissioning garments, making clothes from pieced together fabric, and loads more. So in particular, I really loved hearing about his investigations into clothing systems, including some of the history and the utility of it, and how he's tried tracking and documenting his outfits in relation to the weather, and then how those systems have evolved. So I'm sure you're going to enjoy this one, and I'm excited to receive some feedback about what you took away from it. So I'm going to stop talking now and allow the conversation to commence. So enjoy. So thank you, Guy, so much for agreeing to come and talk to me on the Check Your Thread podcast. How are you doing today?
Yes, I'm doing well. I'm excited to speak. I think about, some of the things that I'm doing quite a lot and like why I do them and stuff like that. So it's just an opportunity to express it and to work through it as well. So
definitely, because sometimes when you're putting stuff on Instagram, as you say, like you don't get much of a back and forth sometimes, do you? Or it can be quite laboured.
Yeah. Sometimes you feel like you're broadcasting for a while and you're thinking, is anyone sort of listening, or, is this inspiring people? I think for me, that's the aim, is to inspire other people. But
yeah, well, you have so many awesome ideas and you're doing so many interesting things that you're definitely inspiring people. And I really hope that this podcast reaches more people that you can inspire. So basically at this point, literally all I know is that you're a cool guy and you live in London and that you do really interesting things with fabric. Could you fill in the blanks a little bit and tell us a bit about yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of how I got started with sewing, I've always been interested in visiting the charity shops or thrift stores, I think it's mentioned in America. So I was always interested in doing that. And I like the idea of going to the charity shop. You never know what you're going to find. You could pick up anything. And then I started to see like fabric in the charity shop. And I was with my girlfriend, and then she was like, why don't you just grab it? I was thinking, that would make a good shirt or something like that.
Yeah.
So I just took it, and I had another shirt I took apart to work out like how the pieces were fitted together and things. And that first shirt, that was the first thing I sewed properly. And I did it by hand as well, just by sort of noticing, how the shirt was constructed.
So literally you went from nothing to a shirt. That was your first project?
Yes.
Wow. Literal deep end.
Yeah. So my grandmother, she used to sew and her mother sewed, but it just felt something that came like natural. It was almost felt kind of like instinctive.
Oh, awesome.
But that's also what kind of the idea behind the light touch is about. I've always been interested in creativity. For example, I used to like produce electronic music, and something didn't always kind of like fit quite right for me. When I first started to sew, it's like it grabbed me. So that's what I mean with applying a kind of a light touch. That's where the logo comes from.
Right. So a light touch in the sense that you don't have to force yourself to do it.
Well, the light touch comes from a meditation principle. It's like focusing with a light touch, not trying to force it too much.
I think a lot of people find that they can get into a real kind of flow state with sewing in a way that they can't with other activities. Yeah. And you can just find out that you've been sewing for 4 hours and you're hungry. You haven't eaten or drunk anything for ages. So when did you get your first sewing machine?
So as I mentioned, I started to sew by hand. I did a lot of like embroidery at the start, and by hand, and then small projects. And then I got a sewing machine. And then, just continued from there. I didn't get into sort of reading patterns, like paper patterns. I know in your podcast, you mentioned quite a lot of like sewing patterns. I don't know. It just felt like a step or something. I just used to take things apart and learn how to like sew them. Because if anything, I do maybe more patterns now. But how I started was sort of taking things apart and just kind of exploring sorts of different.
I used to do that a lot with jeans. I was so obsessed with how jeans were made.
Yeah. So then once I got my sewing machine, I just used to get all the fabric from the charity shop still.
Yeah. Is that still your main source for fabric today?
Yeah, I think I'm starting to change a little bit. I recently read the Fibreshed book. So the Fibreshed it's about like soil to soil clothing. So it's within a radius, so like 150 miles normally it is of like say a place. And then within that place to sort of grow the fiber, like either sort of like wool or like flax for linens, and then you manufacture it in that place, like small scale. Then you dye it using natural materials, and then you construct it. And then the idea is that the whole thing is like compostable
Cool.
at the end of its life cycle. You're trying to make it last as well, but it's all kind of around sort of natural materials. So I've become more interested in that only just kind of like recently.
Yeah. Have you found any fibre production in and around London?
Not so much in London. I'm planning to move to Bristol in a couple of months' time. And I know in there they have like a area, the Fibreshed Southwest, and they have some I think they have something called Bristol cloth, where they've like bought an old, I don't know what it's called, like a loom or something to make cloth, and they do some small scale kind of projects there.
Awesome. So you're going to get involved when you head down?
Yes, so that's my plan. But anyway, it mentions in the book with all the dyes and all like the chemicals that can be used in like fabric.
That's really interesting, actually. It was something that I wanted to talk to you about, because I saw that you made a comment on that in one of your posts. I was wondering, though, that if you're buying fabrics and textiles that have had previous lives and have been washed many times, do you think that may be reducing the amount of chemicals still retained within the fabric?
Yeah, I mean, I'd hope so. Because, after I read it, I was like, ugh, like,
what am I going to wear?
I'm wearing like old pillowcases. Like, surely that hasn't been tested on. But when I've told people that, then I have thought about it. Yeah, maybe you do kind of like wash it out and things like that. Yeah, I was just saying, it just made me think more about kind of like man-made and sort of like polyester and like plastic and things like that. And then after reading it, I was just like, I don't know if I want to like wear it anymore. So
I don't know. I think you're right. I think with thrifted fabric, I think you're probably better off than if you're buying new fabric, I'd say, in terms of the amount of residue of chemicals. Yeah. So can you tell me about that amazing felted waistcoat that you made? Is that part of that experimentation?
Yeah, so that's part of the experimentation. So, so I made a felted waistcoat. So from reading the book, I was just thinking, what could I do, that would be in line with that? Even before the Fibreshed thing, really interested in wool and like how such like a sort of fantastic fiber it is. And I've watched and heard quite a few things, especially during lockdown, like the price of the wool is so low that sometimes, people are like throwing it away and, to sell it is, not sort of always viable. And yeah, just really interested in sort of like that natural fiber. So I made a vest and it was felted wool fiber. And the idea was that it could be, made completely in the Fibreshed models. It could be made sort of locally, but I didn't get the wool locally. And everything could be compostable. So it was more like a prototype, so.
Yeah, because I saw that you mentioned that, if you were to do it again, you'd maybe use organic cotton thread, for example, so that would biodegrade.
Yeah, and I got some like wood-like buttons. You could also make the buttons quite easily. That's what someone did that just saw like a piece of wood very thinly and then do the holes in, and then just like the idea of that. Yeah, and that idea, I've never made like my own sort of fabric before. It's just like kind of going a bit sort of deeper into the handmade kind of.
Have you done any knitting or crochet or produced fabric in that way?
No, but my partner, she knits, and I know quite a lot of people who knit, but I've never got into that. I'm sort of planning to. When we tell people that I sew and that she knits, then they say, "Oh, that's a good sort of combination," because then someone can do the kind of the socks and the jumpers, and someone else can do like shirts and trousers and
totally.
things.
I've just started knitting. I'm not very good, but I'm getting there. But I'm really interested in maybe when you've got all these scraps of fabric, somehow knitting with those, or like making, you got old T-shirts and the fabric's so, I don't know, rubbish, you can't really remake it into anything. I wonder if you could knit that in some way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, actually. So I went to the Southern Wool show a few weeks ago because I'm interested in wool, and I thought it'd be just interesting. But, meet so many like amazing people really interested in it. And I met someone called, she has an Instagram account, Rachel John Textiles, and she's really passionate about wool. And she actually produces, it's like really thick yarn. I think it's like from the carpet industry or something. And she has these like massive like knitting needles that are like, they're big anyway, so like bigger than your sort of finger. And you knit them together to make, I think you make rugs and like carpets and things like that. But some of it is like a thin strip of kind of like fabric.
I'll check her out and I'll put her in the show notes. There's so many people doing so many interesting things, isn't there? It's almost like mind-blowing. Like you just could spend your whole life on Instagram trying to find them all.
Exactly. Sometimes it's kind of difficult to find people on Instagram, but you just kind of accumulate and collect.
Yeah, I think I found you. I think I was following the Dope Men Sew hashtag.
Yeah, that's a good one.
There's some really cool stuff going on there as well, isn't there?
It's interesting from that perspective, like promoting more kind of like male sewers. And I've heard like a few articles and, there's like rise of the sew bro. Have you heard of that? They published like an article I think it was in Esquire. And yes.
Really?
Yeah, about more men, like young men sewing, like especially during the lockdown.
Have you got any friends that sew?
I haven't, to be honest. So my main kind of interaction is kind of through Instagram. Part of my kind of sewing journey, I went for a sewing course at Central St. Martin's in London. Yeah, I think for me being a man sewing, you think sometimes it's mostly women sort of dominated. So I thought when I was going to go to the sewing class, it would be me and a bunch of women. I'd be like the one sort of left out kind of thing. But I was surprised going there. It was like majority men. It was like a shirt sewing, but it was like 75% men. So I guess it's maybe more in my sort of mind, the kind of stereotype then.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So how did you feel when you walked in and there was 75% men?
Yeah, I was surprised really. And it's just interesting just to strike up conversations and how people got into it. So it was mostly like a beginner's type. So some people hadn't used like a sewing machine, for example, before. Yeah, just interesting, to meet all sorts of different people.
What were the kind of ages of the people that were attending?
I think between like maybe 25 and 35 was kind of the average.
So millennial sewers.
Yeah, millennial sewers. So maybe it's a trend.
Hopefully, I'm tail end of Gen X. So do you think in general, like millennial sewers, to bracket you all, do you think they're generally kind of more mindful, would you say, of kind of sustainability and the impact that their clothing may have?
Yeah, I just think just generally everyone seems to be more interested in sustainability. Or like when I was at the Southern Wool show, I've become more interested in crafts. So it seems like, people are more interested in kind of sustainability and more kind of like wholesome kind of activities. So I don't know if that makes it for me personally seem like, the sewing world is becoming more sustainable, if that makes sense.
Totally. Or you're becoming more immersed in it, so your eyes are more open to it.
Yeah, so I'm kind of like diving deeper into it. So yeah, it's difficult to say. And I follow like a hashtag on Instagram and it's like millennial sewing. I was looking at it the other day and I'm trying to work out if there are any sort of patterns or trends, but I couldn't really, kind of group together in terms of like everyone is doing sustainable things or not. But yeah, I haven't really noticed, to be honest.
Yeah. So I saw a post on the way that you are cataloguing your handmade wardrobe. That looked really interesting. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, one of the other areas that I'm interested in is clothing systems. So how all your wardrobe is combined together, so you hear some things maybe like capsule wardrobes or like minimal wardrobes. So I'm interested in the idea of having quite a small wardrobe, but I'm not living that sort of per se so much. It's just an interest in clothing systems. So from some like Google like research, like I had a look into like military uniforms, like starting from like the Second World War all the way until now, and it's like a clothing system. So they have, I think, in the British and the American military, a combination of like 8 different layers that can take you from like -40 to +40 degrees Celsius. So it's all kind of like mix and match. So I've just been really interested in that idea that, when you buy things, particularly from like stores and like shops, it's like one item by itself. But I like the idea of like how all those items combine into your sort of wardrobe. So I've been interested more, generally it's kind of like, there's like a base layer, there's like a mid layer, and then there's like a shell layer. So how all of those like come together.
Yeah.
Part of that, I document like when I go out, like what I'm wearing and like what the temperature is. So in the past, I came up with like a temperature guide. Like, so if it's +20 degrees Celsius, you only need like a t-shirt and shorts, like 15 to 20, these different like temperature guides.
So do you make notes of like, today I actually felt a bit cold?
Yeah.
I love this. This is so interesting.
Yeah. It's quite detailed, to be honest. I think it's date, activity, what the weather is, in temperature, what the wind is, and whether it's cloudy, windy, or what have you. And then it's what you're wearing on your head, your torso, your bottoms and shoes. And then there's a comment at the bottom, you know, like how you felt during it. So
that's so good. Do you take a photo of your outfit, or it's all written?
It's all just written in my notes on my phone. I think I experimented. I had one post. It was like I was planning to do like a series, like this is what I'm coming down the stairs in today, and then on the picture there, I made little like paper cutouts of the clothing system, you know, and like how the items kind of combined and things like that.
Yeah.
So I was planning to do more of that, but I never.
Oh, I know, that's a lot of work, but that would be so interesting.
Yeah, the issue is that my system of clothing keeps changing, so then you kind of have to start again, or so.
Right. How's your system of clothing evolved?
So it used to be more kind of like traditional, I guess, like work wear. So, you know, like work jackets and shirts and like trousers and I think stuff where they wore in like sort of 1940s, maybe sort of like work wear. But more recent, and yeah, so I'm trying to do, I don't buy many clothes these days either. So last winter was my first winter not buying any additional clothes, and I was like cold. I was like trying to survive the winter. All my clothing's like the workwear, it's just like single layer, and I got cold during it.
I love that you were so committed though. No, we're going to power through.
and it just got to the point it was like ridiculous layers. You know, I'm wearing like 6-7 layers, you know, so you have to layer to some point. But I like the idea, like in the spring you can kind of, you know, like you shed your layers and then you build them back up again. That's what I want to do.
Yeah.
But it didn't work so much. You kind of do need heavier clothing. You need like a big coat. So when I was reading, I read a book about fashion during the 1940s, and they're describing like typical man's wardrobe, typical like woman's wardrobe. What did they have in their wardrobe? And for men, it was one heavy wool coat, and then you have something like a mac, you know, like a lighter kind of rain jacket. So I didn't have the heavier wool coat. I just had the kind of mac style. You know, it's starting to get colder now. We're almost October, so I need to start preparing my winter.
Are you going to make a coat?
Yeah, so I've got some wool fabric, so that's my plan. When I initially read that, I was like, wool, how can you just have a mac and like a wool coat? Because, you know, what if it rains? Then surely you need like a waterproof heavy coat. But basically, I since learned from then that wool is very like water resistant. So
yeah, it's because it's got some natural oils in it, hasn't it?
Yeah, so it has natural oils, and it can absorb like 40% of its weight in water before it becomes like wet feeling. So like when I was doing my felt from my felt vest, it's like you can just keep squeezing and squeezing, and it feels like dry, but there's still loads of water come out. So I think I'm now a little bit less about layers in my wardrobe now, maybe thinking a bit more about the types of layers. But I recently watched the first ever Star Wars, the like 1977 one. And I was inspired by
I mean, that was a turn I was not expecting this conversation to go down.
Yeah. Yeah. So they have a tunic which just kind of like wraps around. It's what like Luke Skywalker wears and Obi-Wan Kenobi. And I was like, that's it. That's what I need in my wardrobe. That would be like the perfect layer. And then you can have underneath a t-shirt, or like a Obi-Wan Kenobi wears a what's it called, a turtleneck, or a t-shirt. So it'd be like the perfect layer. So
that's so interesting. I'm really fascinated by like the 1940s and stuff like this as well, the rationing and stuff like that. So I read something recently that I think it was specifically about women. They had, on average, obviously, only like 8 outfits in their wardrobe, and that was all seasons. Can you imagine only having 8 outfits? You'd have to be so strategic about what you had, and also how you cared for them as well, wouldn't you? Because if you suddenly were like, you know, one's in the wash and one's got a hole in, like, oh, that's only 6 options.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so when I read a book at the time, it's called like Fashion on the Ration.
I've got that book.
About that, yeah. And yeah, you're right. If you have then less clothes, then there's more of an emphasis on sort of making again and mending and making the clothing out of unusual things.
You do remaking your garments. I saw that you had like a pajama top that you recently kind of deconstructed and used some of the fabric again.
Yeah, so I try my best. I know that you've had some podcasts in the past around sort of what do you do with the scraps and the things like that. And I call it like decommissioning, like a garment at the end of it, where I kind of like hang it up and then think, what can I kind of harvest from this? Like take all the buttons off and if there's areas of kind of, like big kind of pieces of the fabric that you can kind of cut out and then use for other projects. From my days of like taking apart old shirts and like trying to figure out how they made a shirt, I had these old shirts left still as like templates to make other shirts. So I thought I'd use that kind of like fabric. So you have the kind of like the two front pieces, the arm pieces and the back piece, and then cut out squares to then create another bit of fabric. So in order to combine them, you use a flat fell seam to make like a fabric sort of piece that you then can cut out the pattern pieces from.
Why did you decide to do flat fell?
So it was a brand that I saw. It's called Overlord. When I went to Selfridges, and they had like shirts and jackets, and some of it was from like old denim, and they also had bandanas from America, vintage bandanas to make shirts. They'd done it all through flat fell seams. So I just thought that's a really good idea to do that. So I've just been doing that from then. So the flat fell seam works really well, and then you don't have anything on the inside, if you do just like an open seam, and it's kind of like fray in the middle. So it's then sort of smooth on the inside, and then on the outside it kind of looks cool and utility to have the flat fell.
Definitely. It's got to be loads more durable as well.
Yeah, I like to think so. So I have to see how long it...
You must be really good at flat fell seams now. You're so quick at it.
I've done quite a few I've done a shirt and I did some trousers and it was all flat fell seam. And then thinking which way the flat fell goes, because you can do either side of the seam to then flap it over to one side or the other. So
yeah, cool. So when you're creating a garment that is kind of pieced together, like what's your approach?
I kind of like the sort of the randomness that comes from it. I think I choose the kind of the colors. We have to choose the weights, sort of roughly similar weight and similar types.
So first of all, you get your scraps out and you find the ones that are a similar weight, and then you see within that what looks good.
Yeah. What do you think could kind of go together? So all the while, to get these scraps, it's just part of your sewing kind of process that you're saving scraps. So I generally save like kind of bigger squares, like 50 centimeters by 50, or maybe a little bit smaller, like 25 centimeters by 25. So you're collecting all these scraps the whole time. And then you see in your batch, which are kind of similar, like the sort of heavier weight ones, say for like trousers. And then you kind of lay them out and then think, will all these go together? And then you get out your pattern pieces and you make the piece of fabric by connecting all these smaller pieces together so that it's big enough for the pattern piece. So
you just keep going till it's big enough.
That's it, yeah. And then if you're doing the flat fell seam, the only other kind of thing there is I try and make sure that the flat fell seams don't occur where there's kind of a strategic point. Yeah, so you don't want a flat fell seam going right there. It's going to look kind of like bulky. So that's the kind of like added element. But then other than that, I like it to be just a little bit random and then see what kind of comes together in sort of the pattern. So when I made my pajama top, it just so happened that how the different pieces had connected the front and the back, it kind of made this cool kind of like triangle pointy element on like one of the shoulders. Yeah, and that was just completely just random. So I like that kind of process of it. In my mind is, you kind of make a start, you have a rough direction where you're heading, and then, like that looks good there, or I want to see, you take turns left and right just to see where you end up, and being open with that as well is what I like.
So basically you collect and harvest fabric from existing garments and from the leftovers of your project. So anything from roughly kind of maybe about 40 centimeters or so bigger. Do you keep smaller bits as well?
It's smaller bits, as long as it's like a sort of a decent size square. I'd say probably like the size of a laptop, or maybe half the size of a laptop. So kind of like a decent square. If it's like a little tiny sort of like curvy bit, then I'll put that in a separate. So I've like got different boxes for different types of scraps. I'll put that in a different scrap. And then the smaller ones, I haven't found too many ways to use up the smaller ones other than recycling them. I heard your podcast the other day about putting it in the poof. That was good.
The poof!
I like the idea of slowly building the poof over time.
Yeah, all right. I think I'm going to try and make like a big floor cushion for my kids' bedroom next. Just keep stuffing it.
Yeah, I like that. Just keep putting it, and then one day it's done. So the little scraps, I've made like weird kind of like stuffed animals and things with the little scraps, but mostly I recycle the little scraps. I keep everything else, whether it's like a garment. Every once and so often the sort of the piles get too big, they're sort of overflowing, and then you think, oh, right, I have to do something now. Yeah, end up making some really weird garment, like I made some like patchwork trousers, and then I've made this weird garment, and then I want to wear it. So my wardrobe is becoming more and more kind of like eccentric with all these.
Yeah, but they look amazing though. You must get a load of compliments when you wear them, no?
I think people are impressed. They do like them. I've had like a few comments like with the trousers and some of the stuff that's a bit more kind of out there. Like with the charity shop, it's similar. You just see like a fabric and you're like, oh, that's like amazing. It's like old curtain or something like that. And then you think, oh, I just have to make that into a coat. And then you made the coat, and then you're thinking, now I have to wear the coat. And then you just become a bit more like unusual dressed. Yeah.
So you have also got this really cool thing where, I don't know how often you've been doing this, but you've actually been embroidering the date of the completion of your garment. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I started to embroider the date onto the garments that I sew, just as a way to see like how long that they last for. I can't remember how I started. I just thought it was a good idea. It just came up.
It's a fantastic idea.
So yeah, just when I finish the garment now, I tend to put the date on, and I'm again just interested with the clothes and the clothing systems, that I'm creating as part of that to see how long the clothes last. And then I think with sewing, you can only really realize how well you've done something if you keep it for like 6 to 12 months. You have to like wear it, and then you get an idea of like whether a seam has come undone, or then that's how you learn in future.
So if someone was starting out trying their hand at sewing and they wanted to take a more sustainable approach, what tips or advice would you give them?
I think for me, how I started was through the charity shops and buying fabric from the charity shop. And because it's so cheap, you can buy like a double duvet for like £3 or something like that. You can just try, and there's less worry, if you get it wrong or you like mess it up or something like that. And then of course you can buy a sewing machine, like a decent one, for like £150. So I think with those two, then you're like off, you just try whatever. And then you also be doing something sustainable by one, sort of buying secondhand fabrics, but two, you're also donating to charity at the same time. So I think if you're just doing that, your sustainability sort of grade, I think, would be very high, and it wouldn't be very expensive for you as well. So
and keeping your scraps.
And keeping your scraps, yeah. And then, from when you have a project, if you save all your scraps, then build those back up into a larger piece of fabric and then make more clothes from that. And then it just keeps going, never ending.
Brilliant. Thank you, Guy. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
No worries. Glad to have been here.
So much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this episode and are left feeling inspired. For more info about the podcast, including show notes for this and every episode, head to checkyourthread.com. I'd love to hear from you, so if you have any comments, questions or ideas for future episodes, please get in touch by emailing zoe@checkyourthread.com or find me on Instagram @checkyourthread. Massive thanks to Patrick Potter for production support, to Sylvia Seller for the awesome logo design, and to Simon at Palm Skin Productions for the music. This ad-free podcast would not be possible without listener support, so if you feel you are able, please consider signing up to the Check Your Thread Patreon. For the equivalent of buying me a coffee each month, you'll be making it possible to continue producing regular episodes. Links can be found in the show notes and on the website checkyourthread.com. I hope you'll listen again next week. Until then, take care. Bye!